Are Caltech students born geniuses, or is that just a stereotype? Today, I'll be speaking with a former Caltech admissions officer to find out what really makes someone stand out at one of the most selective schools in the world. Keep watching until the end of this episode to learn exactly what kind of student Caltech is looking for. Let's get into it. Hi, Lucas. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to chat with you today about all things Caltech admissions. So let's jump right in. When you were reading applications at Caltech, how did you know someone was a good fit? Were there certain essays or moments that made you go, yes, this is it. This is a Caltech student. What exactly stood out to you?
Off the bat, there is a general sort of student that Caltech is looking for in very broad strokes. To start with, you need to be really obsessed with STEM. Like, you just need to be living and breathing some sort of STEM passion, and it's something that you want to devote almost all of your time to, because that's what you'd be doing at Caltech. Caltech basically is intentionally the most challenging undergrad STEM education you can find. So it's for the students who will be reasonably challenged by that. They're essentially actively looking for students who struggled to find challenge in high school and would struggle to find challenge even at most colleges. So there are some sort of like bare bones. You need to be a really good STEM student who really wants to study STEM. Then beyond that, in terms of kinds of just what makes a student successful at a place like Caltech, you need the resilience to keep up with both the course load and also research, because research is such a big part of life at Caltech, and most of research is just failing and figuring out ways not to successfully do something. Similarly, again, because of both the way the classes are structured and the fact that research is such a core part of the experience at Caltech, you need collaborative skills. I think some students, and maybe many STEM students who are applying to STEM schools, might even be attracted to STEM because it strikes them as a sort of solo field. But especially at the Caltech level and in research, it is a team sport. And we really need students who are able to and excited to work with other people. You also, of course, need to be both curious and creative. Curiosity is, again, the driving force behind your studies at Caltech. It's going to be really intense. So we need to find the students who actually have that level of curiosity and that number of questions that they constantly get to have answers to. And then again, in terms of creativity, you're going to likely be doing research and you'll be solving really challenging problems where the point is to get you to make novel connections between fields and to basically develop your own process of solving something. So in broad strokes, there is a sort of kind of student that Caltech's looking for, and it's this kind of student who's really good at STEM, really obsessed with STEM, and ready to do it in a sort of like small-oriented team environment. Again, students make a lot of assumptions about what they think will make themselves look the most impressive, when that's not necessarily the angle you're trying to find. The angle you're trying to find is a very specific argument for why Caltech is a good place for you to do what you want. So the students who stood out were the ones who had a specific STEM passion and something that they had been pursuing for a while and were clear about, but one that they reflected authentically. It wouldn't be the student who racked up really impressive awards in all these different fields. You can be a genius who wins every competition you do, but if there's no sort of logic behind the competitions you're signing up for and there's no through line or passion there, you're not showing that you have that Caltech drive to really focus on the subject and research as an undergraduate. But if you're applying for computer science, for example, that's often a really saturated market. It is at Caltech as well. But if you happen to know that Caltech is more focused on algorithms and data structures as opposed to software engineering, and then you perhaps have a specific idea about how you want to apply maybe artificial intelligence to an issue in geology, hey, Caltech is also really strong in the geosciences. So it'd be the students who had more specifically aimed and more authentic, almost low-key applications where they would just be focusing on what they're obsessed with and giving us a good sense of who they are and who that person is as someone who is obsessed enough with the fields that Caltech covers and the ways that they're interested in covering them to get through the 4 years that they'd be signing up for.
Yeah, it's funny because the idea of fit at a place at Caltech can feel intimidating. So people have this image in their head of what a Caltech student has to be. And I actually saw a Reddit comment that said a lot of people that get into Caltech are literal superhumans. So Lucas, I have to ask, do you really have to be a superhuman to get into Caltech?
You do need to have what many people would describe as superhuman ability in STEM. Caltech is truly looking for the brightest students all over the world. They're looking for science leaders of the next generation. And that's, again, going to your point about like stereotypes that students have in their head. I think one that they often assume of all top colleges is that they're looking for a really specific kind of leadership. At a place like Caltech, a STEM leader might be someone who's always in the lab, not necessarily talking to like outside people, but knows how to communicate between different scientific teams and will genuinely be making new discoveries. And that's often the kind of research they're starting to get involved in, even at the undergraduate level. Again, I think some students think they need to be more well-rounded for even a place like Caltech than they necessarily do. Caltech is looking for STEM people, but you do really need to have an exceptional level of ability. I can't really impress upon students enough that it's a tiny school. It's extremely selective because of the number of students who apply. It's, as far as Caltech understands, like the most rigorous undergraduate program in the US. So I wouldn't push back on the sentiment behind that Reddit comment, to be honest.
A lot of students also apply to Caltech, are also looking at MIT, and they're often grouped together as top STEM schools in the US. But from your time in admissions, how does Caltech really differ from that?
Yeah, so I'd say a lot of the differences between Caltech and MIT, which are otherwise fairly similar schools with fairly similar admissions processes and such, stems from just the scale of Caltech relative to MIT. MIT is significantly larger than Caltech, and that changes things at both like academic and social levels. MIT is both larger and more urban, and there's just a wider range of ways that students could be spending their time, or like pockets of the student body they could be occupying, whereas Caltech is closer to a sort of like small monoculture, and everyone's really invested in the same thing, which is usually fundamental research in the fundamental sciences. The size of Caltech, research is, if anything, even more accessible there. But if we're talking about differentiators, you could look at MIT as a larger school, and because it's larger, it offers a wider range of opportunities. They have quite simply more programs. They're not necessarily all as focused in just the really pure fundamental science fields. But because it's bigger, it doesn't offer the resource opportunities that Caltech offers to undergraduates. Caltech undergraduates can start doing research really early in their careers, and it's a really core part of the culture there. It's not a requirement. It's not part of any sort of graduation checklist or anything like that. It's just the kind of student that Caltech is looking for are the students who are really like thirsty and chomping at the bit to start research as soon as possible. Caltech will be a bit more of a sort of like focused and streamlined research intensive experience.
I guess to follow up with that, are there certain values then or traits that Caltech prioritizes that those other schools maybe don't?
Yeah, so I'd say many top tech schools prioritize many of the same traits, and those core ones would definitely be curiosity and collaborative skills and resilience. Again, resilience is going to be a big one at any school that's just intentionally being really challenging. But Caltech is, again, aware of the fact that it gives its undergraduates more access to research than anyone else. So it's really looking for the students who are the kind of people to take advantage of that. So that's where, again, creativity comes into play. Creativity is a great thing to show when you're applying to any STEM school, but specifically at a place like Caltech, you don't want to come off as just someone who like absorbs knowledge and then repeats it back in a test. Mm-hmm. The kind of person that Caltech is looking for is the kind of person who absorbs knowledge and then has a bunch of questions about that, questions that haven't necessarily been answered yet, or things that they want to do with that information that hasn't been done yet. So that sort of creative, original approach of what can I do with what I'm learning? How can I combine the tools that I'm assembling in unique ways is pretty unique for Caltech, I would say.
We've had quite a few parents and students reach out to us before who are applying to STEM schools, and a common concern they have is about their essays sounding very technical, robotic, as if they need to prove how smart they are in every sentence. But I'm guessing that's not really what stands out to admissions. So were there any essays that made you pause and think, okay, this student doesn't just want to go to Caltech, but they really truly belong here? What did those students do differently? What kind of mindset or curiosity that came through in their essays that stuck with you till today?
Really effective essays are the ones that are technical because the student knows what they're talking about and they're just really excited to share exactly what they're doing and they're thinking at that level of detail. And that can be a really good signal that the student is already really sophisticated and thinking really deeply and will be appropriately challenged and supported at a place like Caltech. But if they're really just cramming in every buzzword they can, it's not just going to be a weaker essay in terms of how it reads to an admissions officer. It's going to actively send a very specific message to faculty once faculty is reading it. You could very easily overpack your essay with technical words because you want to make it sound really smart. The thing is, at Caltech, the most competitive applications are read by faculty. So you better really know what you're talking about if you're getting technical. I'd say whether it's a narrative essay or a technical essay, if you're trying to overwhelm us with details about yourself and just how far ahead of your peers you are, then you're giving us a signal about what you care about, which is how you present yourself and how impressive you come off to people and almost how much you compete and try to separate yourself from others. And that's not a mindset that works at Caltech. At Caltech, you have to realize that you are no longer the smartest person in the room and you're going to be struggling as a team. So the essays that are more narrative can be effective if they really explain why they want to go to Caltech and what they want to do there in terms of STEM, in terms of what they find interesting and why Caltech will go deeper or challenge them in those fields in a way that they won't be challenged in other schools, or why it's important to them to be able to get to do research early on. So again, answering more why questions about what drives them, as opposed to trying to provide a very impressive laundry list of why they're already super successful and impressive and we should reward them with an admission, which is not how it works. I just encourage you to really lean into the geekiness as opposed to trying to overwhelm with a lot of big words. Help us understand what will keep them working when they feel like they haven't understood anything in weeks. That's what shows that a student is ready for Caltech and really belongs at a place like Caltech.
I know you touched a little bit about research earlier. A lot of students also worry that they have to have cutting edge research or published papers just to even be considered at a school like Caltech. Is that actually true? What would you say to a student who feels like they don't have enough STEM experience? And honestly, what does enough STEM engagement
Sure.
really look like from an admissions perspective at Caltech?
So it's not true that you need to have performed research or have a publication under your belt in order to get admitted at Caltech. In fact, the majority of students admitted to Caltech, at least in the years I worked there, did not submit such materials. It's not a prerequisite. It's not a requirement. It's a very intentional process in the office where we basically talked about it and realized we don't want to just be admitting students who happen to live right next to universities with a lot of resources so they can find something and build something cool that they couldn't build at home. There are going to be students from really isolated areas who have a lot of potential and they're just waiting for a place like Caltech to unlock that. So if we required research, we'd be actively filtering out a lot of students, and that's just not a good process to have. In terms of STEM engagement, usually you want to show that you're engaged with STEM beyond the classroom. But again, even there, it's a kind of tricky sort of it depends admissions answer because it really depends on your context. Again, Caltech is not looking to reward students for things they've already accomplished. They're looking to enable students who are showing the most potential relative to what Caltech offers. So we're going to look at your grades, your test scores, what people write about you, what you write about yourself. In most cases, you're going to have access to some sort of STEM extracurriculars, and the most successful applicants tend to take advantage of them, not because we have any magic number in mind. In fact, again, when people ask us about numbers, we usually emphasize quality over quantity, or because they're finding the right extracurriculars. There's no automatic admit camp that you can attend in order to get into Caltech. So in one extreme, if you're growing up in rural Idaho and you need to work many hours a week in order to support your family, Caltech is not going to contextually expect you to be spending many hours on extracurriculars. And that doesn't mean that they're out. That means that the read is very different. And we're looking a lot more for them explaining what would they have done? What did they try to do? Often, what opportunities did they make for themselves? So in those cases where students really just don't have access to the infrastructure to do research stuff that a lot of students are psyching themselves out and thinking they have to do, the successful applicants are just doing research as they can on their own, or they're taking free classes online, or they're building something with their own two hands at home. And again, it's about the level of like detail and passion with which you describe that work that matters. Caltech isn't just looking for the students who like STEM classes and do well in them. They're looking for the students who truly live and breathe it and will be thinking about and talking about it with their friends pretty much 24/7.
If a student came to you today saying, I'm starting my Caltech application, what's the first thing you'd want them to focus on or think about?
So if they're starting their application, let's assume like they're starting their application because they've looked into Caltech, they understand it and know it would be a good place for them. Then I would really encourage them to think about times in their high school life, ideally most recent year or two, where they have either demonstrated or developed their curiosity or creativity or collaborative skills or resilience, because Caltech really does need to understand that beyond what your transcript will already show in a really standardized way, that you're the kind of student who will actually enjoy Caltech and take advantage of all the stuff that students aren't necessarily forced to do just through curricular requirements. If it's earlier than that, if a student is more just thinking about Caltech and thinks it's one of the best STEM schools and I'm a good student and I want to do STEM and I want to do it at the best level, so I'm going to apply to Caltech, I would really encourage them to just look more into what Caltech is. Look at the admissions blog where students are writing, find videos that students are posting about their personal experience, because Caltech is a really specific place and is different than I think a lot of students assume. Many students, even the ones who know it's small, are often surprised by how small it is. It's about 900 undergraduates. That's smaller than most liberal arts colleges. Some students accidentally shoot themselves in the foot by writing about how they want to go to a technical school so they never have to take a humanities class again. And Caltech requires more than the average liberal arts college does. So if you're earlier in the process, I would also really encourage you to figure out whether Caltech is a good fit, whether you want to go to a really small school where almost all of your time will be homework or research. It's not going to be much of a traditional college experience, and it's going to be a really small but tight-knit and supportive community, or whether you're looking for something more traditional, something a little wider. If you want to have the opportunity to triple major in arts and humanities fields as well, or really just anything else, that there's a club that you want to do that doesn't happen to exist at Caltech or something like that, it's really okay to be a brilliant STEM student and for Caltech to not be the place for you and to just not spend your time applying because it's not worth your time necessarily. So if it's earlier on, I'd advise students to really consider what Caltech is and what it isn't, and whether what they're looking for actually aligns with that, because we really don't want people to be swayed by Caltech just being Caltech, because it wouldn't be fun for most people.
This next question I'm very curious about. What's the biggest misconception applicants have about Caltech that you wish you could clear up once and for all? And just by looking at you, I can tell you got a lot to say about this.
Yeah, so the answer I always give, and this is a bit more about admissions more generally, but certainly at Caltech, is again that students assume this sort of adversarial, I need to show that I've suffered and persevered and am more impressive than anyone else approach to applications with admissions officers, when that's really not what our job is. What our job is to look for ways to argue for your place in the school and then to continuously go to bat for you. The way admissions at Caltech is structured is basically your territory manager, the person reading your application because of where you live, is your advocate through the entire process, whereas everyone else is not necessarily working against you, but is looking at more of the big picture and asking your representative territory manager all these questions to really get down to whether you're a good enough fit to justify admitting you, given just the ratio of applicants to spots that we have. So again, I think students will really overwrite their essays. They'll either try to make them incredibly poetic or use really big words they don't quite understand, or fill it with jargon that doesn't actually add much meaning, which faculty will call out with ease. Or again, they'll force themselves to sign up for the classes they think they're supposed to, or to do the extracurriculars they think they're supposed to, when doing a completely solo deep dive into what you found online about machine learning might have been way more exciting for you and would likely result in a more persuasive essay than the same sort of mechanical, I went to the club, let me convince you that I was the smartest person at the club sort of approach. Also, this idea that because you're going to go to a STEM school, you get to completely isolate yourself in your field and only your field. There are some schools like that, but Caltech decidedly is not. Again, first of all, there is a pretty developed core curriculum that is very intentionally interdisciplinary, because again, the sort of research that students are doing at Caltech will almost always involve more than one field. And then beyond that, they're going to be required to take more humanities and social science courses. So those are just like facts that students really need to understand about Caltech, especially if they're going to write to the contrary in their essays, which does happen. But then more broadly, I think students assume that Caltech is a sort of scary individual place where everyone is a sort of Sheldon Cooper type that's like accidentally condescending and doesn't really make friends. Having worked at Caltech, that's really far from the truth. I'd say a lot of Caltech students would describe themselves as some combination of like geeks or sweetie pies. They're very close knit. Again, they don't have much time to be doing traditional college stuff besides STEM. They're really way more collaborative with each other than they are competitive. In terms of specific programs, a very common one we see is just students who want to go to Caltech in order to become a software engineer. And that's just not a good use of Caltech's resources. Again, the students who go to Caltech and then become software engineers at some point in their life tend to be wildly successful, but they're not necessarily going to find the undergraduate computer science curriculum that they were expecting, where they get to just learn many different coding languages and start building apps from scratch. Caltech computer science is very mathematical, it's very fundamental, it's very conceptual. So if you think more about coding or software engineering, you're likely not a fit for Caltech computer science specifically. If you're more into algorithms, data structures, artificial intelligence, that's more the kind of computer science that Caltech does. So that's a very just common, easy sort of misconception that people sometimes fall into, is not even understanding the kind of program they're applying into. And I guess then a similar one would be students are sometimes tripped up by the fact that they see that Caltech only offers an aerospace engineering minor for undergrads, even though they probably heard that Caltech is one of the best places for aerospace engineering, and it does in fact run NASA, which is huge. And the very simple answer to that is that faculty at Caltech are very particular about naming and accuracy, and they'd like to be accurate about the degrees they're bestowing upon their students. And at the undergraduate level, in order to even get into aerospace engineering, you still need a bachelor's worth of mechanical engineering sort of background. So what students who are aerospace engineers at Caltech do at the undergraduate level are major in mechanical engineering and minor in aerospace engineering, because the minor is just conveying the number of aero specific electives that they're taking in their later years. You are getting, I would argue, a more comprehensive and more rigorous aerospace engineering education at Caltech than you would anywhere else. But some students don't necessarily realize that when they see that aerospace engineering is just a minor. So I just want to be really clear. That's because most schools will offer an aerospace engineering major, and 80% of it is identical to the mechanical engineering major, whereas Caltech is more particular and just very literal about, yeah, you're going to do the mechanical engineering first, and then you can do a minor's worth of aerospace engineering specialization.
So, just to wrap things up, just one final question. After all your experience reviewing applications, what's the one thing you really wish every Caltech applicant knew before they hit submit?
Quite honestly, it's that we are left excited and in awe of more applications than we get to admit. And that might be obvious, but very specifically at a place like Caltech, where it's so much smaller than a single major might be at most other schools. We are rejecting many applicants who are confident we'll get into similarly top tier schools and will have really bright futures. And we just know that Caltech isn't the school to best empower them for something like that. So really, if you're in the Caltech applicant pool, you're probably really serious about STEM, and we see evidence of success way more frequently than we see evidence of a really specific fit for Caltech in particular. It's not the way admissions work, it's not the way rejections work, but we often wish that we could just talk to a student and explain to them that we know they're going to get into a school that's going to be an even better fit for them, and that's why we're excited for them. But that a rejection is really often just truly not at all about ability, and really just about a fit with Caltech specifically being the tiny and research-driven institution that it is.
Thank you so much, not just for your time, but also for being so open and thoughtful in sharing your experience. It's, I think, really rare to get such an honest look behind the scenes at a place just like Caltech.
Of course.
And I know our listeners will really appreciate it. So, truly, thank you again. It was a pleasure having you on. And I hope you see you next time.
Thanks. Same to you. Good luck, everyone.
If you're tuning in right now and want more personalized guidance on your college applications, click the link in the description to schedule a free consultation call with our team of admission experts. We'd love to help you feel confident and prepared in your college admissions journey. And if there's a specific topic or school you'd like me to cover next, shoot me an email. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.